A country is judged by the actions at the top. Such is the way across the world. Nations are judged by their rulers and not by those that live within the borders. Good morning to one and all. It's my pleasure to begin this auspicious occasion by wholeheartedly welcoming everyone. Let's begin with a silent prayer. Thank you. Respected Chief Guest of the day, Shri M.K. Narayanan Sir, the former National Security Advisor of India, Principal Dr. T.A. Shaul Hamid, and all the dignitaries on and off the dais, faculties, and students. As we all know, we have gathered here for an interactive session on the topic, the new international order and a world sans borders, conducted by the Civil Service Aspirants Club of TKMC. The club functions with the greatest intention to enrich and take care of the affairs of civil service aspirants of our college. It has been set up with the specific objective of giving guidance to the students who aspire for the top post in the country's civil services. Unofficially founded in the year 2016-17 and officially inaugurated in 2022, the club has worked solely to help its members to reach their goals by properly organizing events and activities. The club identifies and mentors students who can contribute to nation building through civil service. It has also forged its reputation by consistently organizing outstanding programs like group discussions, debates, weekly quizzes, and much more to help them expand their frontiers and better themselves. Also, our central library has a dedicated place called Aroma Lace, particularly for the students to prepare for competitive examinations like civil service. Now, I would like to invite our principal, Dr. T.A. Shaul Hamid, well-wisher and mentor for the students of this club, to deliver the welcome address. Please, sir.
Guest of the day, Honorable Sri M.K. Narayanan, Deans, Heads of Departments, Faculty colleagues, staff, my dear student friends, a very good morning to all. This talk on new international order and a world sans borders, organized by Civil Service Aspirants Club of the college, it carries tremendous significance today than ever before. The club was inaugurated, as my student friend has rightly pointed out, the club was inaugurated a few months back by Sri K. Biju IAS, the Revenue Secretary to Government of Kerala, an alumnus of 96 batch of this college. This club is based in Central Library and planning many such programs for future. This talk is relevant due to many reasons. Pursuing the global interest of superpowers through creating and maintaining international economic institutions, bilateral and regional security organizations, and liberal political norms form an ordering mechanism more often collectively referred to as the international order. The primary reason for the focusing attention on the international order today is because it is perceived to be at risk. Risk number one, some leading states see many components of the order to constrain their powers. Risk number two, the volatility due to economic crisis as we see in Sri Lanka and all. Three, shifting domestic politics in an era of slow growth and growing inequality. Despite the centrality of order to United States, the term order itself has been used in divergent ways by different observers. There is no consistent, widely understood definition of a rules-based liberal order. The order's legitimacy rests on states believing that the participation in the order benefits them directly, and this belief is being shaken by various economic and social trends. That's why, as I said, this talk is important, because only a real expert would be able to shed light into the subject. Here we have a guest of very high esteem and scholarship to speak on the topic. Sri M.K. Narayanan joined in Indian Police Service in 1955 and passed out with highest marks. After a brief stint in subdivisional police officer in the erstwhile state of Madras, he went on deputation to Intelligence Bureau in February 1959. The rest of his service career was spent under the Government of India, mainly in Intelligence Bureau, in which he dealt with a whole range of issues concerning internal and national security. He headed the Intelligence Bureau from 1987 to 90 before heading the Joint Intelligence Committee for an year. He became the chief of IB again in 1991 before retiring in 1992. He was then appointed as Special Advisor of Internal Security to the Prime Minister of India beginning in May 2004. He was Indian National Security Advisor from 2005 to 2010. He played a significant role in the negotiation of the landmark Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement of 2008. On 24th January 2010, Sri Narayanan was appointed as Governor of West Bengal. The way he had dealt with two successive state governments of conflicting ideologies stands as a landmark example to all those who respect the Constitution of India. His articles on security and border issues attract thousands of elite readers across the globe. We are truly fortunate in having him with us in this morning to talk on new international order and a world sans borders. On behalf of the Civil Service Aspirants Club of this college and on behalf of all who gathered here, may I extend a warm welcome to our honorable guest to this meeting. I welcome all deans, heads of departments, faculty, colleagues, staff, and other friends. And my student friends, they are the driving force of this college. It's your institution and it is a student-centric campus. And this program is only run by students, though I extended a welcome speech. So I extend a warm welcome to one and all who are attending this meeting. Thank you, Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. It's time for the interactive session with our Honorable Chief Guest, Shri M.K. Narayanan, sir.
First he speaks and then interact.
Okay, sir.
You want to prepare your impact? No problem.
No, sir. So, let's hear his speech. Sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shahul Hamid, Principal, and the management of TKMCE, and as we've been told, the Civil Service Aspirants Club for inviting me to address this group of very aspiring members of the civil services. It's seldom that I get a chance to speak to such a youthful audience. Most of my audiences have been older, bored people who have forced to listen to you because you're there for a particular purpose. I welcome the opportunity to do this. Maybe if I had known that the audience would be principally of students of this kind, my subject might have been slightly different. But nevertheless, I think this is a subject of importance for anybody who wishes to make a mark in the world. The subject New International Order and a World Sans Borders is being divided into two parts. The first part deals with the state of international order today. The second part, is it not clear? As I said, the first part, is it clearer now? Can you all hear? Okay. I said the first part deals with the state of the international order today. The second part largely deals with the new threat that we face, the threat from cyber. I think both are in their own ways highly disruptive. And it's important for anybody who lives in today's world to understand the nature of both these threats. Young members of the Civil Services Club, I want to say that most people were taken by surprise when the conflict between Russia and Ukraine burst forth in the manner that it did. And when Russia went further and invaded Ukraine, it seemed at first that the sole motive of Russia was to teach Ukraine a lesson and prevent it from moving closer to NATO. As is common in all matters of international or global politics, what you think is never what it seems. And the war in Ukraine today is no longer a war between Russia and Ukraine. It is a struggle for establishing a new international order in which Russia is pitted against the West, principally the United States, Europe, the rest of Europe, and the West as such. It's important to understand this because this does mean that we are at a tipping point in international relations. And it's critical to understand what this means for each one of us and for all countries across the globe. Let me begin by giving you a kind of a textbook talk. As an introduction, I would like to say that at the end of the 20th century, all students of international politics came to recognize that the world was adrift. Nothing was quite clear as to what was happening. Today, 2 years down the road, what we are now seeing is that the world has become intensely chaotic. Chaotic. It's no longer a question of trying to understand what is happening. The question is, does anyone know what is taking place? Why do I say this? At the end of the 20th century, we had become quite accustomed to two identifiable power blocks. Today, there are many, many more claimants for power, and hence chaos has become inevitable as far as the world order is concerned. There are also many new tension points that have emerged. Some more critical than others. Much of the end of the 20th century, the Indo-Pacific was the area of major concern and parts of Africa and West Asia. Today, Europe has become the single most important or key focal point with regard to world order. I would particularly ask the young students who are present here to realize that the fundamental change that this has introduced into the world order. The new geopolitical changes mark a major and greater threat to international order than in many of the earlier threats. For instance, the Ukraine conflict marks the beginning of a new order of things that will determine not only war and peace, but also critical aspects such as global energy matters, many production and distribution aspects, and the future of the international governance system itself. Let me take each one of the tension points. A few months ago, if I was to talk to you, I would not have started with the region that I'm mentioning now, Europe. Europe was quiet, Europe was seen as placid, and people in Europe never thought that they would see another war in their lifetime. Today, while China remains a major threat, and its rise and hegemonic tendencies are still perceived as a grave threat, Ukraine has displaced China due to its greater manifestations as the graver threat. The West had immediately perceived what this means, and For the first time and most unusually, the West has reacted almost completely and totally to combine against what they perceive as Russia's aggression. The Ukraine conflict, as I mentioned at the beginning, has now been converted into a trial of strength between Russia and the West, and particularly the West and NATO. This is what I would call a very major division that has been brought about. It's not confined to a small part of Europe. It means that there's a struggle, as I said at the very beginning, for a new international order. How has this and how does this affect what's taking place? Simultaneously with the entry of the West and NATO into the conflict, and more particularly the United States, we have seen Russia's expulsion from the SWIFT financial transfer system, the imposition of global sanctions against Russia's central bank, the voluntary withdrawal of Western companies from the Russian markets, etc. It's a complete isolation of Russia that is being attempted, and has to a considerable extent succeeded. But this has also given rise to fears worldwide that the engine of growth may falter. Distribution conflicts within and between societies would intensify, and that the preconditions for the success of the export model, namely the free flow of goods across countries and continents, would all be threatened. That means the globe itself is now threatened economically from the conflict. Additionally, there are concerns, which are expressed in financial circles, that the freezing of Russia's central bank reserves puts most of the world's central banks, which are already on high alert, in great jeopardy. They do not know what will happen. The fears are that central banks across the world would try and effect a shift in their foreign exchange reserves, which in turn could well destabilize the dollar's position as the global reserve currency. This would entail a major shift in terms of geopolitics and geoeconomics, something that neither Russia nor the West anticipated would happen as a result of the intervention in Ukraine. After Europe, I think the most threatened area of the globe today is the Indo-Pacific. I would say that the Indo-Pacific is the world's primary zone of strategic competition. It entails both big power clashes as well as a struggle for preeminence. The reasons for this are not far to seek. The Indo-Pacific region never had so much hard power and wealth. At the same time, its capability to manage the various tensions that come with such a situation remains untested as of now, and anything could happen. This is therefore likely to become the harbinger of future conflicts. Let me explain this in some detail. Till now, the world remained a relatively silent witness to China's growing authoritarian tendencies, especially in this region. It included China's demonstration of what is known as A2, or anti-access area denial capabilities, and which not only seemed as a direct threat to Taiwan and to maritime traffic in the South China Sea, but as an index of China's determination to displace the United States as the most important strategic power in this region. China aggravated the situation by rapidly pursuing its own version of the revolution in military affairs, largely driven by artificial intelligence systems, and potentially negating the strategic and operational advantage the US military currently possesses in the region and beyond. In turn, this has produced a sharp response from the so-called democratic world led by the United States. The latter in particular is intent on challenging China's attempt at hegemony in Asia to begin with and elsewhere thereafter. The US is unaccustomed to having to deal with the sphere of a peer competitor, namely China, and has therefore undertaken to build a series of new military arrangements in the region, and the region here being the Indo-Pacific, and make a joint effort to strengthen their military capabilities. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, popularly known as Quad, which involves the United States, Japan, Australia, and a reluctant India, and the AUKUS, Australia, UK, and the US, are an outcome of such concerns about aggressive behavior. What this has meant is not more security, but more insecurity. Coming next to China, which is often painted as a villain of the peace in our struggle on international relations, I think it's important to understand China and what drives China. With an economy of over $15 trillion, its net worth today is estimated to be higher than that of the United States. Militarily, China is second only to the United States as of now. It is already challenging US supremacy in the Indo-Pacific, both in regard to area dominance as also in regard to state-of-the-art weaponry. The Chinese Navy is well positioned to tackle or checkmate the US in the Indo-Pacific. But what is of equal, if not greater concern, is that the immediate future seems a little more, what should I say, I don't want to use the word bleak, but a little more uncertain because of what is going to happen in China in the immediate future. China is going to have its landmark 20th Party Congress. The Chinese Communist Party, the 20th Party Congress. And the preparations for the 20th Party Congress are very important in understanding where China believes it needs to be and what it proposes to do. It's particularly important for the Chinese President Xi Jinping, who already is called or titled the helmsman, which brings him on par with Mao Zedong and ahead of Deng Xiaoping. And he is now intent on enhancing his legacy future. How does he enhance his legacy? Is by establishing still further dominance, at least as far as Asia is concerned. He may not follow Mao's example and embark on hazardous exploits. There are concerns, however, that given the kind of unrivaled power that he possesses, it could lead him to indulge in erratic behavior. This is at least what the United States and the West believe. And more so in the context of the looming economic challenges that exist as far as China is concerned. I do not subscribe to that, but I do think that this period is critical for all of us in Asia and of course for the rest of the world. For while Xi is in complete control, or at least appears to be in complete control today, the situation is that there are many headwinds that he confronts. And when an authoritarian regime confronts headwinds of this kind, there is every reason to be apprehensive and with reason. What he may do, he may not behave like Putin did in Ukraine, but quite clearly it's not certainly that will accelerate peace in the region. I would say that one of the difficult points in the international order today is trying to understand what China is and what it might do. China acts erratically from time to time. It often acts like an irredentist power, intent on expanding its frontiers and the limits therein up to what existed during the Qing dynasty. Yet, it's an old civilization. It's a mature civilization. And it would be wrong to believe that China would act in a manner that it would throw all caution to the winds and act in an irrational or erratic way. However, particularly the younger elements who are present here must understand that many things make up for the nature of geopolitics. And while geopolitical forces shape relationships and conflicts, most often a poorly handled crisis could lead to major catastrophes. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge that we face today. I do believe that if you compare the Indo-Pacific with the conflict in Europe, the Russia-US conflict, there's far more to be worried about what may take place in the Indo-Pacific, where you have China in a far more dominant position than Russia is in Europe. The NATO doesn't have the same kind of capacity to handle conflicts in Asia, and many of the Asian countries are undecided as to where they stand vis-a-vis China. So China's hopes and beliefs that it can be the hegemon in Asia seems relatively strong, I would say, and that makes it a difficult country to deal with. There are many other parts of the world also which require our attention and concern, and you must understand as to what might or might not happen as a result. North, West and South Asia are all today in a certain amount of turmoil. The situation may be less threatening than what we see in the Indo-Pacific or in Europe at present. But that does not mean that peace is at hand. In some ways, and this is particularly important for most of you engineering students, you must understand what existed in 18th century Europe, when there may not have been major wars, but countries were at conflict. In some ways, Asia resembles 18th century Europe. And almost all nations here are working at cross purposes. There are few friends, there are many uncertainties. So, while the Indo-Pacific is an area of major concern just now, I think there is no peace that we can expect in the rest of Asia as well. Let me begin with North and West Asia, including Afghanistan and Pakistan. All of you are familiar with the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan last year, which well epitomizes the shambling nature of security across large parts of Asia. Months after the Taliban takeover, violence and disruption are still the order of the day here. 2 decades of foreign intervention have, if anything, only aggravated the crisis within the country, with terror networks, including the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS, continuing unchecked. While the geopolitical impact of the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan is only beginning to unfold, please understand that what is already evident is the growing danger to the region and beyond from the expanding drug menace, which has intensified very greatly in the past 12 months. Coming to Afghanistan's neighbor, Pakistan, this country is facing serious political headwinds. While India and Pakistan do have a conflict, and it goes back ever since the inception of both countries, the fact is that we have always desired that Pakistan should be relatively stable, because instability in Pakistan casts a major shadow over much of the region. However, recent political tensions in Pakistan are in fact providing encouragement to both endemic militancy in the country, and is also acting as an incentive to a host of terror groups that Pakistan has nurtured over the years. This is all adding to the prevailing uncertainty across the region. Further south, political uncertainty in Sri Lanka, arising from the virtual collapse of the Rajapaksa government, is having an unsettling effect across much of the South Asian region. One particular area of concern for us is this uncertainty may again revive Tamil militancy, which had remained dormant for the past 2 decades. But we suffered tremendously from the onset of Tamil militancy. Our concern is whether continuing political uncertainty would lead to a major increase in Tamil militancy, and which would then spill over into India as well. I also would like to make a reference to Bangladesh. Bangladesh today is relatively quiet, but there are frictions and there are inner tensions that exist. I would therefore say that the situation in Bangladesh is relatively fragile. And while Bangladesh has been probably India's most consistent supporter over the years, uncertainty in Bangladesh would cause a great deal of unrest as far as India is concerned. I think that if you look at the map of Northwest and South Asia, we can certainly not be comfortable as to where we stand today. Coming next to West Asia, here again the situation remains relatively unsettled. In 2020 we had the Abraham Accords, and the expectation was that this would bring about a measure of peace between Israel and some of the warring Arab neighbors. Yet, while there is some amount of peace on the whole remains fragmented. A fragmented peace is always a dangerous situation. More particularly, I would say that while Israel has bought peace with some of its neighbors, it continues to act in a manner that aggravates the situation. And I would say that apart from the Israel-Iran standoff, there are many other aspects of the region which require a great deal of attention and concern. And quite clearly, once again, we are not anywhere near what I would say peace as we understand it. There are many other areas of concern as well that I would like to mention here. One, of course, has been our unfortunate situation, the terror threat. The terror threat across many regions of Asia remains unmitigated. While the activities of the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS are largely confined to West and Northwest Asia, as also North Africa, this remains an omnipotent threat, an omnipotent problem. And stray terror attacks continue to be reported, both within this region and even beyond, as far as Europe is concerned. I would say signal, if the word is right, one area of deep concern that has emerged in the wake of the Ukraine crisis. This is an apparent weakening of the resolve among nations after 1945, especially many countries currently involved in the Ukraine conflict, on not lowering the bar in regard to the use of nuclear weapons. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Post 1945, nations across the world had taken a resolve that never again would they use an atomic weapon to attack another country. And there are several agreements in place. All of a sudden, many of the nations involved in the Ukraine-Russia conflict have been talking in terms of lowering the bar as far as this is concerned. And there are, I would say, more than a hint about the use of battlefield nuclear weapons. Countries possessing such battlefield nuclear weapons are very obliquely hinting at the possibility of the limited use of such weapons if the Ukraine-Russia conflict were to continue without a pause or not end in the near future. So this raises another major issue that we need to understand or appreciate. I would end this part of my talk by referring to a basic truth that while recent developments confirm that while politics and power generally drive geopolitics, it is now becoming apparent that leaders are mattering more and more. The West's dislike of Russian President Putin is certainly one of the factors leading to prolonging the war in Ukraine. Similarly, the West's dislike of Chinese President Xi Jinping, which is reciprocal, I might say, is aggravating tensions in the Indo-Pacific. China's Xi believes that events are in his and China's favor, since the military balance in the Asian region is in a position to employ what is used in military circles, escalation domination metrics, both in terms of nuclear weapons and in new forms of hybrid warfare. This is tending to give Xi Jinping and many of the Chinese leaders an impression of that they are omnipotent and that they could establish themselves as the hegemon of Asia. Students who are present here, the world is both interestingly and dangerously poised. The consequences of a single mistake could be grave. As former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh observed in a recent article, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has dismantled the wisdom that had dictated the nature of international politics and peace after 1945. According to him, India needs today both an absence of global conflict and a non-destructive geo-economic policy. It is hence all the more important for leaders across the region to appreciate the nature of forces of work across the entire world. This alone can ensure peace and prevent a wider conflagration now and in the future. This ends the first part of my talk. I will now move to the second part, which I have titled as A World Without Borders. I don't think that's a good title to have, but I couldn't think of a better alternative, because the cyber war that I'm going to talk to about doesn't have any borders, and there are no country that you see as friend or foe You have officials hacking by the cyber people. You have also got a lot of private people doing the thing. But particularly for students of engineering and related sciences, I thought I might make a reference to this aspect because it is going to become the most serious threat to peace, and not necessarily from a national point of view. I begin by saying that while global disorder is the most distinctive feature of the world today, there are graver challenges already present and some which are likely to become even more dangerous. Unsettled conditions across the globe are not confined to wars between militaries. They include trade wars and numerous other conflicts to gain ascendancy, and more specifically, how to employ technology to their advantage. Here I propose to talk largely about the last named item. In that respect, the most potent danger currently that is apparent is cyber and the cyber threat. Every day, we come across reports about ransomware threats, use of malware such as WannaCry and other esoteric dangers, and massive data breaches and leakage of information to unauthorized third parties. This is happening, young students, almost on a daily or maybe almost on an hourly basis. What is more worrying or threatening is that across the world there are numerous cyber arms, I will put that within quotes, cyber arms dealers who are present in almost every country today, who provide sophisticated malware to both companies and governments. Cyber attacks already belong to the category of next generation warfare and are being touted as the fifth dimension of warfare in addition to land, sea, air and space. Cyber has almost completely altered both intelligence tradecraft and military strategies. Given the current state of geopolitics, it is estimated that cyber warfare is poised to become the most critical element in any future war between nations. Officially sponsored hackers working closely with state authorities are the new age warriors in the area of asymmetric warfare. We are therefore living in an extremely dangerous world, something that we were not accustomed to till fairly recently. The Ukraine-Russia conflict is a classic example of this new age war. It also denotes a turning point in the area of cyber conflicts, with hackers being recruited as volunteers from across the world by a government to support Ukraine troops on the ground. Ukraine has openly appealed for volunteers, in effect an army of hackers from across the world, to provide digital support to beat back Russia's offensive, and they are succeeding in this. This is emblematic of how war is evolving today. I would, however, like to underline the fact that the cyber threat is not confined to the battlefield or the canvas of war. Most, if not every nation today, faces a host of cyber attacks. But unfortunately, the common tendency is not to publicize the fact that they are victims of a cyber attack or have had to pay ransom as a result. Yes, in the case of very exceptional circumstances, such as involving major industrial outputs or government agencies, this comes out in the public domain. I just mentioned a couple of instances. You may be all familiar with this. One, or what I would say, the most serious publicized cyber attack in the civilian domain was SolarWinds in 2020. I think many of you would have we're familiar with this. It involved data breaches by Russian hackers on almost every single key target in the United States. The ministries of defense, or in the case of the United States, the departments of defense, energy, and state were amongst the maximum which were affected. In 2021, again, early 2021, thousands of US organizations were the targets of an unusually aggressive cyber attack by a Chinese group called Hafnium, which exploited serious flaws in Microsoft software, gaining remote control over affected systems. Thereafter, almost right through 21 and the early part of 2022, Russian, East European, Chinese cyber criminals have perpetrated several more ransomware attacks across the globe and not confined to only the United States or the West. As I said, very few of them have been publicized. But I particularly wish to point out the one that was received the maximum publicity because they openly admitted to paying ransomware, of course originally in bitcoins and subsequently in regular dollars. The one by the US company Colonial Pipeline, which almost crippled the whole of the northeast United States. The important point is Colonial Pipeline is one of the few companies who mentioned the figure, several $1 million that they paid as ransom to unlock their computers and release their files following the ransomware attack. I've given examples mainly of Chinese and Russians, etc. This may give an impression that most cyber attacks are sponsored by Russian, Chinese, Korean, and similar countries. The truth is entirely different. Western countries are equally, if not even more, active in this field or in this region, and they have been in a free-for-all as far as the cyber world is concerned. Most publicized cyber attacks are, however, in the civilian domain, mainly about civilian targets. However, you must understand that the primary thrust of cyber criminals remains military and intelligence targets. And following that, those which are generally categorized as strategic in nature, such as power supply systems, transport networks, and the health sector. While the military and intelligence sectors are generally better prepared, and their planners, both the military and intelligence planners, are constantly engaged in erecting defenses against software vulnerabilities, they are fighting, I would say, a losing battle against what are known as zero-day attacks that could cripple their systems. The fact of the matter is that zero-day attacks are usually perpetrated by viruses that remain dormant for a long, long time and are only detected after a long time. It's much later that you realize that you have been targets of an attack of this nature. The most well-publicized zero-day cyber attack as of now is with the use of the Stuxnet worm quite a few years ago, which crippled Iran's uranium enrichment program. Since then, what we know and what many of the experts know is that zero-day software has been so much finessed that viruses remain dormant for years on end before being detected. The number of zero-day targets have also increased exponentially. What we can say without fear of any contradiction is that zero-day attacks are being carried out on an extensive scale, both in the civilian and military domains. A zero-day attack is something that You call it 0 day because those in the cyber market do not understand or realize that there is a weakness in the system. It's an unknown factor. It's like having a virus that you don't know in medical terms. So it's almost like a doomsday kind of a situation as far as that is concerned. While the 0 day is mainly employed in the military and intelligence systems, in the civilian domain, what we witness today are manifestations of what is generally referred to as the cat and mouse game of cyber warfare. The most prominent weapons used are ransomware, phishing, including spear phishing. Ransomware attacks have skyrocketed, with demands and payments going into billions of dollars across the world. Targets of ransomware attacks have also greatly expanded. What they seek, the most precious item that they seek is data. Healthcare has become a major target today of ransomware attacks, and compromised health information is a key commodity targeted by cyber criminals. Education and research, communications, and governance are other targeted sectors at present. It is said that new attacks take place in this area alone every 10 seconds. Cybersecurity experts warn that with working from home becoming the new norm, the pace and thrust of cyber attacks have gone up exponentially. With the cyber weapon becoming the weapon of choice, not only during a conflict but even during peacetime, it is apparent that matters have reached a tipping point. Cyber weapons already carry untold capacity to distort systems and structures, whether civilian or military, including the capacity to interfere with democratic processes. The Pegasus spyware, which has recently been in the news, is all this and more, and there are other systems and not only Pegasus in the field. These are amongst the most misused among cyber tools, hiding behind a cloak of anonymity. In effect, what I am trying to stress when talking of the cyber threat is that there is a real need today to guard against a whole new epoch of threats, especially cyber threats. State-of-the-art cyber weapons are being developed almost daily. The trend is likely to intensify still further. Cyber uncertainty is set to grow as more and more devices are connected to networks. For us in India, this is a wake-up call. It would be a grievous error if we in India were to underestimate the extent of the cyber threat posed to it by other countries, and not only from China. Indian government agencies such as the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, NCIIPC, and the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team, CERT-IN, have no doubt been energized, but while publicized reports of hostile attacks have been few, the reality is that we are very much behind the curve when it comes to erecting proper defenses against a likely or a possible avalanche of cyber attacks from different quarters. More attention needs to be paid, for instance, in the civilian sector, to infrastructure targets, including power and ports, and also to health and financial sectors. As I said, defense and intelligence agencies have their own protective mechanisms in place. They also are not, in a sense, invulnerable to such attacks. I end here with a pious hope that what I have said about the cyber threat will make this audience sit up and take the necessary precautions. Eternal vigilance may not be enough to stave off a cyber threat, but it is the first step in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Truly enlightening words. Actually, you have shed a light into the unseen part of cyber security, cyber problems, and international order. First part was solely for international order. So my question is from that part. Recent turmoil in China, turmoil in Sri Lanka, not China, turmoil in Sri Lanka. How do you see there was a Chinese intervention there for the last 1 decade, more than 10 years. So is it an after effect? Is it this present turmoil is it an economic problem, or is it social, is it connected to the politics too?
I'm not a soothsayer, so I can't be absolutely sure. But I think it's a big lessons or major lessons for countries on how you manage your economy. And what Sri Lanka faced and has failed to do is something that India faced in 1991. We also faced at that time the same kind of economic issues. We had a major balance of payments crisis. Our economy was going down the drain, and we even had to sell some gold to shore up our foreign exchange. We overcame that by the fact that we had at that time an outstanding economist who became the finance minister, Manmohan Singh. People don't give enough credit to what he did. He saved India from what I would call a zero-day attack, if I might use the cyber technology. Essentially, the point is that managing your economy is an important point, particularly in periods where the economy-driven economies are quite. The pandemic is a major, what I call, difficult period for all economies, particularly the economy. No, I'll stand there.
No, sir, no, sir.
No, please, I think is it better? I think he'll do that. Oops. Oh, no problem. Am I clearer now? Yeah, I think so. Okay. No, if I might repeat what I said, I said the problem in Sri Lanka is something that other nations also have faced from time to time. We in India faced this in 1991, when we had a major foreign exchange crisis, we had a balance of payments problem, our economy was dropping, and we overcame that by ensuring at that time, that we had a foreign minister who has an international reputation as an economist, and we also decided that we'd break with many of the policies that we had followed prior to 1991, which was a socialist-oriented policy, etc. So the issue in Sri Lanka is very, very similar. They borrowed. They were also given loans by the Chinese. The Chinese are like money lenders anywhere across the world, and they were trying to squeeze the Sri Lankan government into doing what they wanted. Essentially parting with parcels of their territory, which would then become Chinese domain. So I would say that the main problem with Gotabaya and Mahinda was neither of them understand economics. I happen to know both of them personally. They were leaders at the time when the Sri Lankan government managed to deal with the Tamil problem. But other than that, because they staffed some of the government with military and other personnel who had no understanding of economics. So the basic point is that Sri Lanka faced a serious crisis, and particularly with the pandemic, because it's an export-driven economy, Their foreign exchange collapsed, and therefore their capacity to deal with the financial turmoil that was developing was very few. I'm sure that if they can certainly deal with it, they have very good economists, if they can turn around the situation, if they are allowed to do that, and there is a government in place. Now, added to the problem in Sri Lanka today is that there is no government worth a name. You have a new Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who doesn't have a party. If you want to run a democracy, you need a political party. And the answer is not, using strong arm methods, etc. You need sage economic understanding of what is required. And I think the economy in Sri Lanka is easier to manage than the economy in India. So if India succeeded, if you get the right person, I think Sri Lanka could manage that. Sri Lanka must also understand that too much dependence on any country, whether it is China or anyone else, is also rather unhealthy for itself or for any other country of the same kind. I don't know, did I answer your question? Yeah.
So what I would like to ask you is how the India-China border issues and the unceremonious departure of US from Afghanistan and the inception of Taliban affects India in its international development.
Okay, and you put three questions into one. All right. Let me take the Sino-Indian border, which is, I think, a far more fundamental issue from our point of view. Let me make the point that India and China will never be friends. India, China, bhai notwithstanding. They are two civilizations, two very different civilizations, and there's a constant conflict, unseen conflict or unstated conflict between the two civilizations. The Chinese don't understand Indians. If there's one country that China is affected, I'm not talking in military or other terms. In civilization terms, the Chinese don't understand what makes India tick. For 6 years, I was the special representative for border talks with China. And my counterpart was a man who held a rank higher than that of the foreign minister in the country. He was a state councillor. He could keep asking, why are Indians so much interested in religion? He couldn't understand the power of religion, different religions. He couldn't understand it. I said, why don't understand why we are so afraid of the Falun Gong and whatnot. I said, India is a civilization which respects religions. It understands it, and we are deeply wedded to a religion, and that's what keeps people together. He used to come to India, and I brought him to Kerala. I mean, we would come spend 2 or 3 days in Delhi, and then we'd take him to different. So when he came to Kerala, he couldn't believe there were churches, mosques, temples, all. He said, what is all this, and why do you allow them to do this kind of stuff? So it's a civilizational conflict that you run into between India and China. But China does not believe that India is its equal. It likes to think that India is inferior to it. So there's a constant conflict which is going on. Yes, militarily they are stronger. There's no denying the fact that they are stronger. From time to time, they would like to teach India a lesson. The moment you say that you are part of Quad, that you are part of any group which is trying to encircle China, they will try to teach you a lesson. And if you take the Sino-Indian border, the problem is that the Chinese are remarkable map makers. They have maps for every single Chinese dynasty, where the territory was and where the territory existed. Indians have never had maps. India does not believe in maps. In the latter day British period, some maps were there, but the British were not interested so much in the Indo-China border. They were interested only in the western border because they were worried about Russia. So we are at a disadvantage when you say you are encroaching into Indian territory and whatnot. There's always a conflict of perception. The Chinese keep on saying, okay, produce your map and let us see where the maps are. The maps are under what the British left us are, very kind of thing. We have descriptions that there are trees, valleys, etc., but no hard facts. So there's a constant, they have an upper hand in trying to tell us that how do you say we are aggressing into your territory? So that's what's happening in Galwan now. Of course, nobody here would have gone. I've been in that area as a young officer. I mean, it's wasteland. You don't really know where the line is drawn in that sense. Both parties must agree to a line. We are willing to do that, but the Chinese want to draw the line by which a fair amount of what we deem as our territory would be seen as Chinese. So that's a conflict. It lies dormant. Anytime India, they think they want to teach India a lesson, they will encroach into this place. It's easy. It is as difficult in the Ladakh area as in the Arunachal area. At one stage, when Deng Xiaoping, no, even before Deng Xiaoping, they were willing for a barter. They said, all right, we'll accept the borders as far as what then was Nifa. Now it's called Arunachal Pradesh. But you concede so much of land in the Aksai Chin area. As a democracy, conceding land becomes very difficult for us. We did not agree. Then when Deng Xiaoping was in charge, he made a similar offer. Then at one stage they were interested in Nifa area. I mean, that area they said we'll concede your demands in China. So it's a constant flux. If somebody goes with maps, the Chinese are in a better position than us. If you go by what we call civilizational concerns, India is better because Buddhist influences, etc. We have far more. So constantly there is this. But the undercurrent of all this is, which is a civilization that they want the rest of Asia to understand or appreciate. They want the Chinese civilization. They don't want the Indian. Most countries of Asia would like the Indian one, not because they like India, but it's less dangerous. Take the Sri Lankan example that we mentioned. India has never been a predatory economy. We don't try to take over a country. We may like to exercise a certain... The Chinese like to control. They've done that now. Now they're going to do it in the Solomon Islands in the East. So it's a struggle for influence, and in the struggle for influence, the Chinese today, because they are probably I don't know whether the second biggest or the biggest economy. One is never very, at least as far as the Asian part is concerned, they're well ahead. They have the money, they have the strength, and on the seas also now they are becoming important. They're trying to flex their muscles. So we have a problem in how to deal with China. At the moment it's a total conflict, but maybe we need to arrive at some kind of a modus vivendi, because otherwise we'll be spending so much of our time. And in terms of resources, more particularly with all the new age items that you require, they're controlling it. I mean, at the moment, the Chinese standards are going to dictate everything by 2035. And so we will find ourselves further in a difficult situation. And we have seen how, because of the Chinese are controlling this and that, and if they take over Taiwan, which they will do when they want to, we are finished as far as semiconductor and other businesses are concerned. So we need to achieve a level of peace without conceding ground to China, rather than a no conflict, no peace kind of situation. What is the second part of your question? The US always departs when the going goes against it. The US also claimed that they won in Vietnam, but I think that was a kissing a ploy rather than anything else. I do believe that having gone in, they should go out. I mean, the Americans don't have the stomach to fight. I can quite understand. Fighting a war somewhere else, you get into it. Before you can think, you get into it. And the Americans are very good at using armaments. I think what they're doing in Ukraine is what they're good at. They can supply you the armaments, they can probably supply, but they don't want foot on the ground. They don't like people being killed and going back. That immediately means that the government is in the kind of thing. The Americans should never have gone into Afghanistan in 2001. They did it soon after the attack on the trade towers. So you leave a vacuum, And when that vacuum, the vacuum naturally gets filled by elements like the Taliban, etc. And I think you've really, in a sense, finished it. I've been, as the NSA, I used to visit Afghanistan fairly often. And I thought that a measure of peace had come to Afghanistan. Nothing gave you greater pleasure than the plane from Delhi used to land around about 7:30 in the morning. Well, going from there to the place where you were staying, you'll find rows and rows of children like you going to school. Particularly girls and whatnot. And now you say you can't study, women can't go to school, can't go to college, you don't be seen. I mean, it's a complete travesty of what you may say civilizations are concerned with. Are you asking me whether the Americans should never have been there? But if they having gone in, they shouldn't have gone out in the way they did. And that is my answer to your question. It has also created an impression that the Americans are untrustworthy. You can't depend on them in the manner that you would like to, because when the going gets tough, they are not available.
Good morning, sir. Sir, the question is about India's position in the new Ukraine-Russia conflict. Have we moved more towards Russia in this newly emerged situation? And attached to that, whether there is any remote chance of any realignment in geopolitics with respect to China and Russia? And if yes, what will be India's stand or India's survival possibilities in the newly emerged situation?
Okay, I know this is a constant, what should I say, question or quest of people. You must understand that there is no what I call black and white in international relations. A lot of it is based on the nature of geopolitics at a particular time. There's a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Where does NATO come into it, or the US come into it? It should have been the job of the United Nations to broker a peace. There is no reason why the United States because if it was at least Ukraine had become a NATO ally, then at least you are bound by a treaty obligation to support. If India and Sri Lanka were to get into a fight, I want to know why the United States or Russia or China or anybody for that matter would support, say, Sri Lanka against India. So, I mean, look at it from one point of view. Okay, civilizationally, a country should not invade, and that's what I try to say in my talk. A great deal of geopolitics today is dictated by the fact that I don't like leader A or I don't like B. So some country doesn't like Manmohan Singh or Mr. Modi. That's no way that you dictate your policy. You dictate your policy based on what is in your national interest. The Americans want to cut Putin down to size. If you go by what you call treaty affirmations, Ukraine has no business to ask to become a part of NATO, because from 1991, at 1991 there's a treaty, I forgot the name of that treaty, between the US and Russia, or at least NATO and Russia, but it said that the borders are here, and that you would not allow NATO to encroach any further or go any further. That has been violated at least 3 times. And now Ukraine is a particularly odd country. It's half Russian, half Russian in the sense that half of them speak Russian. They are also Russian Orthodox as far as their religion is concerned. And it's a very sensitive point. It's to some extent like, while the reason why we were deeply involved in the Indo-Sri Lanka conflict, because you have a Tamil-speaking population in the north of Sri Lanka, north and east of Sri Lanka. There's an affinity that you develop. That's why we were supportive. I mean, technically you can say, what business has India to get involved in the conflict in a neighboring country? Much the same is the position here. Therefore, there is no question of why are we supporting the Russians or why are we supporting them. Russia should not have invaded Ukraine, I concede. But there are many factors that you need to also mention. The world is driven entirely by the US story. I'm not in every magazine, whether it is The Economist, whether it is the Time magazine or any magazine in the world, they're all echoing what the United States wants the world to believe, that Russia, because primarily the West dislikes Putin. They see Putin as a gung-ho kind of leader. They want him out of the picture. And they also, as I said, they also want Xi Jinping out of the picture. Xi Jinping is not that easy, but Russia is possible. And then the whole of Europe is safe. Then NATO becomes the most powerful force in that part of the world. That's a battle. Why should we get involved in it? So we have taken a position. We have abstained. So the abstention is based on the fact that we don't want to get involved in a conflict, but we have made every effort with Putin and others to try to say that, tone it down and whatnot. But once the war has started, it becomes very difficult to tone it down because Zelensky, he's a nobody really in every sense of the term. It's American equipment, American money, everything is going and supporting him, and he's going on needling Putin, who's certainly no great statesman, but he's a leader in his own right. So it's a tussle between the United States and Russia. The United States and Putin, not even Russia, they're hoping that they can ensure that Putin is thrown out and then they will have a pliant person concerned. So why should we get it? So it's not a question of whether are we going closer. We certainly don't want to go closer to either the Russians or the Americans. But in terms of whenever we have required any help, the Russians have always come to our help. And that cannot be said of the United States. So that's the position we have taken. None of the civil service aspirants have any questions, I think.
Sir, I have to ask a question about NATO.
Sorry?
NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO,
okay,
Yeah.
right. Huh.
It was a primary demand of Russia to end the war in Ukraine was to dismantle NATO. NATO is like, its purpose is already over after the dissolution of Soviet Union, but still finding new means to create a thought like narcotics and involving activities like narcotics and terrorism to create a thought that it still have relevance to exist. So how it would affect if we dismantle NATO, how it would affect the developing countries and the members of the NATO?
How would we, I didn't, what's the last part? What did you say?
How the dismantling of NATO would affect the developing countries as well as the members of the NATO?
No, the developing countries outside Europe, certainly dismantling of NATO will have no impact. NATO is really an instrument of the United States. And to some extent, I would say, in the old days, the UK and whatnot. I don't think many of the countries in Europe are anxious to sort of prop up NATO in the sense. But for the United States, NATO was an important part of. It's a legacy of the support that they gave Europe through the Marshall Plan and all in the old days. So they became the guardians of Europe at a time probably when Europe needed guardians. Now I think Germany and Germany had the possibility of being a pacifist country for the first 35 years of after the Second World War. So they didn't mind having the Americans to spend money on getting troops, etc., etc., etc. So somebody else will pay the bills for our protection. That was the position of many European countries because Europe was devastated during that war. So between 1945 and I would say up to 1975 or 1980, they depended on NATO as a kind of force. And the Americans like to say that we are the keepers of Europe. We are lucky we are protecting them, etc., etc. But I think in the last 15-20 years, that many countries of Europe were not seeing NATO as of great value to them. And particularly during the last 10 years, there have been many times when there have been a conflict of perception. But for the Americans, it is almost like an article of faith. That means if NATO goes, then we are no longer relevant to Europe. If we are no longer relevant, we are confined to just... So everywhere the Americans are now there. You want to shore up NATO, you want Quad, you want AUKUS, you want all kinds of things. I'm a big power. I need to keep my strength. Fair enough. I can quite understand the American viewpoint, but I don't think that all other countries need to follow in line. Speaking for myself, I don't think Europe needs a NATO to fight against Russia. Russia is not in a position to. And if Russia does, all the countries can get together. You don't have to keep a standing NATO army and NATO headquarters and NATO kind of stuff for that purpose. But it is there. I paid for your survival for the last 20-25 years. You keep the NATO army. The NATO army has come down also in strength. So the answer to your question is, NATO is not needed so much by Europe as by the United States. For United States, it's a major symbol of... do you need a principal for the TKMCM or not? That's a question that many children may say, that you've got enough professors, why do we need to do it? So it's a question of a perception of what is there. But now what is being happening is NATO is being used by the United States to carry out a major conflict with Russia. And Russia, the expansion of NATO, you have now created an impression that without NATO, countries cannot ensure their peace. The latest is countries like Sweden and Finland. They have remained neutral even during the Second World War and whatnot, but why they want to join NATO? It's all under pressure. It's all a matter of political chicanery and of various kinds. So, as an Indian, as somebody who's been part of the thing, as a country that has remained by and large neutral, I don't think NATO has really a position in today's world. But the Americans think otherwise. And most European countries, it means from the European countries a certain lessening of the amount they spend on their own defense. It's really a matter of economics rather than politics in that sense.
Informative. So that was the end of our interactive session. Now I would like to invite the member of TKM College Trust, Shri M. Harun Sir, to give a memento as a token of love and respect to our Honorable Chief Guest. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Aditya S. Saji, Program Head, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Honorable resource person of the session, principal, faculty members and the participants. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on the occasion. On behalf of TKM College of Engineering, Civil Service Aspirants Club and the entire team, let me call it a fraternity to extend a very hearty thank you to Sri M.K. Narayanan Sir for gracing us with your knowledge and sharing us with your thoughts throughout the session. Once again, I would like to thank you, sir, for sparing time from your busiest schedule to grace the session. Now, I would like to thank our principal, Dr. T.A. Shaul sir, for proposing the welcome address. He is the one who has supported us wholeheartedly throughout the conducting of the session. Thank you so much, sir. I extend our sincere gratitude to the faculty members and coordinators of this session for making this event a grand success. I would also like to thank Harun sir for gracing this occasion with his presence. And last but not the least, I would like to thank each one of the participants of the session, without whom this event would have not happened. Thank you so much.